Hi, everyone. As you're coming into the Zoom meeting, it would be great if you could go to the chat and just type in where you're joining us from. Oh, I see Kamala Lewis. Hi, Kamala. I know where you're coming from. I'll probably say that a couple of times as people come in. So let's see if I will start and say, I'm here from Tucson, Arizona, where it's monsoon season. Hi, everyone. As you're coming in, hi, I'm Marcia Nedlin. I'm going to kick us off today, but it would be great if you could go into the chat and just let us know where you're tuning in from. Let's see, I see somebody has a hand up. Is that really true? Lisa, hi, Lisa from St. Louis. And
good afternoon. The chat is disabled.
Okay, thanks for letting us know that.
No problem.
It was work. This has been happening over and over in Zooms I've been on for the last week or two.
Okay.
I'm sure Anne can make it work. And I bet Kim, that's what you were after, Kimberly, as well. Here we go. Hi, Kathy from Hagerstown. Oh, she did that in the Q&A. Okay, let's see if we. Yeah, the chat's working for sure. Okay, who's here today? Hi, everyone. If you didn't hear me say this before, we're just typing into the chat where you're tuning in from. So we have Julius from Chicago. Julius, where in Chicago are you? Are you working in a particular neighborhood? Michelle in Memphis. Hey, Michelle. Terrence in Cincinnati. There's Cincinnati. One of our panelists is headed to Cincinnati the instant this webinar is over. And I used to live there and work there for 12 years. Oh, there you go. Matt is the one who's going to Cincinnati. Amos from Lancaster, Dayton, Ohio. Kate, hi, Mike. Cleveland Heights, Buffalo, New Brunswick, Minneapolis. Nice. Allie's from Baltimore, Cleveland. Tasha. I don't know Dundalk. Is that a neighborhood in Baltimore? Okay. So Kimberly's from Washington University, excellent medical center. Detroit, Allen, Texas. Wow, this is amazing. Thanks, everybody. So let's see. I think that we can start in a little bit here as more people are joining the webinar. So again, welcome to everyone. My name is Marcia Nedland, and I'm one of the organizers for the National Middle Neighborhoods Community of Practice. Today, our topic is equitable place-centered strategies for safer communities. And I have been looking forward to this one for a long time. We have an amazing panel today, really fantastic actionable strategies for the short and long term. And I'll tell you everybody who's going to be talking with us in a minute, but let me say something about what middle neighborhoods are. The National Middle Neighborhoods Initiative is fairly young. It's only about 6 or 7 years. I guess I should figure out which it is. And it's focused on mobilizing attention to what we're seeing is the disappearance of middle neighborhoods, either through decline because people aren't really paying that much attention to them, or through gentrification because of the super hot housing markets on the coast, and now sort of this recent pandemic housing market that's been pretty hot across the nation. We started out as a kind of motley mix of researchers, practitioners, policymakers who were noticing trends around middle neighborhoods that were troubling. And then we got together and wrote a book about it. We were hosted by the American Assembly on that topic. And as we promoted it, realized there were people across the country who were having similar concerns. So now we're sort of working to get policymakers, practitioners, cities, units of government to pay attention to their middle neighborhoods and make sure that they're in a place where they can continue to be a place that people buy their first home and enjoy having a solid quality of life, and that we know those neighborhoods are going to continue to be there for cities. So what we have in this national initiative, first of all, I'll jump to the last paragraph. It's a joint project of the National Center for National Community Stabilization Trust and NeighborWorks America. NCST handles the research, policy analysis, and communications side of the initiative. And they also staff our National Steering Committee that has about 20 people that are a mix of researchers, practitioners, and policymakers. And then NeighborWorks America supports the community of practice, primarily through myself and a couple of other consultants who facilitate peer-to-peer learning. We do a lot of that through webinars like this one. We have newsletters, case studies. We'll facilitate virtual and real site visits. And we're here to help make it easier for you to pay attention to your middle neighborhoods and figure out what to do next there. So we hope that you'll join us. You can go to our website, middleneighborhoods.org, go to the bottom of any page, and you can sign up to be a member of our community of practice and to get our newsletter. So today we have this incredible panel. So first of all, I want to really give a shout out to LISC, because we basically we begged LISC to organize the speakers for this session. And LISC has its own department called Safety and Justice. And this department, we'll hear more about this from Matt Perkins, has been around for quite a while, focused on these topics. So they really know a lot about safety in neighborhoods and how residents can do strategies on their own in partnership with nonprofits, in partnership with law enforcement, city government, et cetera, and just create safer places. So first of all, we have Matt Perkins, who's the program director in LISC's Safety and Justice Department. He's coming to us from Maryland. We have Tom Wyatt, who is executive director of the Neighborhood Engagement Hub and a principal of his consulting practice, Connected by Design. He's coming to us from Flint, and he's really an expert on using placemaking principles and CPTED principles to create safer places. And then we have this fantastic team from Alameda County, California, from the Sheriff's Office. So we have Hillary Bass, who's a senior program specialist. We have Charles Joe, who we're currently trying to promote to be a co-panelist or co-leader here. And he's a lieutenant with the Sheriff's Office. And then we have Marty Neidifer, who is also with the Sheriff's Office and is a captain there. So we're going to hear about how they've been working for a long time to implement strategies in partnership with communities to make safer places. So I'm going to turn it over to Matt now and let him take it off. He's going to line up his own slides. Thank you so much, Matt.
Thank you. First and foremost, a big thank you to the Middle Neighborhoods Initiative for giving us the opportunity to speak, especially Marcia and DePetta for really putting this together. So I appreciate the invitation and always glad to talk about our work. And before I share, I just want to provide a little more background on the speakers today. So I'm Matt Perkins, Program Director at LISC Safety and Justice. Been at LISC for 9 years, focused on collaborative community-based partnerships to create safer spaces. This includes providing training and technical assistance to grantees of the U.S. Department of Justice, and the specific initiatives you'll hear about today came through that, and have a 25-year career in community-based crime reduction that really includes an emphasis on problem solving, on partnerships, and on place-centered approaches to crime. And as mentioned, I'm working out of Rockville, Maryland, along with two dogs who may decide to co-present, especially if the mail comes. After me, you'll hear from Tom Wyatt. Tom, we got to know when he was Director of Neighborhood and Community Services at Kettering University, in his role managing over $1 million in federal grants to support public safety, placemaking, and real estate and economic development in the University Avenue corridor. Tom's gone in his career from audio engineer to expert on community engagement, placemaking, and development, particularly in areas challenged by violence and victimization. And because of his work in cities like Flint, his expertise extends to developing interventions that can be started quickly and cheaply. Also very happy to have been introduced to our Alameda County crew through our TTA for U.S. Department of Justice, including Hillary Bass. And I have a long write-up here of Hillary, but the important thing to know is that Marty, who you'll also meet, gets great ideas, and Hillary has to make sure they happen, including doing things like taking a decade to build the Reach Ashland Youth Center to provide for the needs of youth in the Ashland, unincorporated Ashland area of Alameda County. And it's a state-of-the-art youth center, provides health services, has a audio and video engineering studio, and just an amazing community asset. And it happened because of Hillary's determination and dogged pursuit. Captain Marty Nidifer, for me, one of the really big thinkers in policing that I've ever met. And we're going to hear about the ideas of community capitalist policing, which is something that Alameda County has been pursuing for several years now, but driving force also of the Deputy Sheriff's Activities League, which is a nonprofit set up in conjunction with the Sheriff's Office to be able to do all the preventative work that needs to be done in any large metropolitan area. And Marty came to the Sheriff's Office working in the neighborhoods in which he grew up, but after a career, or part of her career, as a sports reporter and editor with the Alameda Newspaper Group. And we'll also hear from Lieutenant Charles Joe, who is now kind of becoming the second generation at Alameda County Sheriff's Office of these ideals around community capitalist policing. Charles has led at the community level these efforts to really build a relationship between the Sheriff's Office and the community, but also build community relationships and build collective efficacy and social cohesion, which are terms I will be defining if you're not familiar with them. And Charles has found himself in a position to organically and positively shift the culture of San Francisco Bay Area law enforcement, and is currently on assignment to facilitate the reimagining and restructuring of special handling housing environments at the Santa Rita Jail in Dublin, California. So a really neat group, and I'm going to start the presentation and deliver my part as quickly as possible so you can hear the actual interesting stuff. So can I get a thumbs up if you can see my presentation? All right. So again, I always like to take people to school and talk about the whys of the approach we take to creating safer neighborhoods. And hopefully many of you are familiar with LISC, Local Initiative Support Corporation. We are an economic development, nonprofit, community development, finance institution, and intermediary, which of course means we don't do any of the work ourselves. We're completely dependent on local partners, usually nonprofits, to do development work. We have offices in about 35 cities. It's been changing quite a bit over the last couple of years, including a growing footprint in the Southeast, and have a rural program that works in 45 states across over 2,000 counties. And so why would an organization like LISC be getting into safety work? You know, part of our history has always been trying to make development meet the expectations and desires of the residents and the communities in which we work. Not surprisingly, in the late 80s and early 90s, safety came up quite a bit. And so about 28 years ago, Liz founded the Safety and Justice Division, which became an internal training and technical assistance resource for our local offices and their partners, and really focused on creating safety in two main ways. One is focusing on physical space, the places where crime disproportionately happens, and in creating partnerships, collaborative partnerships that address kind of the long-term and systemic issues that lead to crime. Because of that approach, in recent years, we've worked in over 100 cities and neighborhoods, primarily through contracts with the Department of Justice to support their grantees, because we have a unique approach nationally, especially in our relationship to grassroots and nonprofit organizations at the neighborhood level. Also funded by state government, county governments, city governments, and philanthropies to do the work. I think we all know there's a lot of searching for new ways to address crime and safety. We are in a time of experimentation, and what we're going to talk about is, I wouldn't call it a new approach, but that idea that we can systematize this and make it a common approach to bring prevention and intervention efforts alongside response activities usually handled by police department, is one where we're searching for kind of definition and regular answers to, and to build an infrastructure around. And I show this slide of 100 neighborhoods and cities, just so that you know, if you're trying this stuff in your jurisdiction, in your city, you're not alone, right? Other people are trying it too. And so we welcome you to join the conversation about what a new focus on creating safer spaces can look like. For us, that includes transforming places. Again, the focus on physical space, uplifting people. So training nonprofits is a main method of doing that, both in the methods that we'll talk about today, but also just building capacity of nonprofits. We see city governments, county governments, and others turn to local nonprofits often when they need assets in a community to help build safety. And unfortunately, they're then left on their own too much. They're used for what they're good at and then kind of left to the side. And so one thing we fight for is, if you're going to work with local nonprofits and doing something like a community-based violence intervention, right? And use them because they have attributes and resources and assets that you don't have anywhere else, you're obligated to build the capacity of that organization as well. And then reshaping systems. So how do we change systemically the way we address safety? And through addressing place is a big part of that for us. There's this concept of situational crime prevention, and I just want to introduce you to the crime triangle, which you see on the right of your screen. And really that is meant to represent that in order for a criminal event to happen, three factors have to be in place. There has to be an offender, there has to be a victim, and there has to be an environment in which that can take place. And most of our efforts in the criminal justice system, especially, focus on offenders and to a lesser extent victims. Very little focus systemically on addressing, identifying, and healing the places or environments in which that happens. And so for us, LISC as a place-based organization, that was really a way to start our safety and justice programming. Some issues that always come up, right, for us in our work, which we need to address is this fear of displacement, the idea, well, if you make this place better, crime is just going to move somewhere else. And it's probably the most studied phenomena in criminology, and it's just not true, right? When you make a place better, most of the crime that would take place there goes away. Now, there are some types of crime, of course, that are going to move elsewhere. If somebody's addicted to fentanyl or heroin and the market or shooting gallery that they're used to frequenting disappears, they're not just going to, throw up their hands and say, well, that's it. But other types of crime, things like vandalism, destruction, petty theft, even fights. Think about teenagers who end up in the same place at the same time and may have an argument that extends to a physical altercation. If you can change the spatial dynamic and that event goes away, it's not going to be repeated. Diffusion of benefits. What we find is that actually when you make a place better, crime doesn't just move, but even the places around it get better as well. And using crime prevention through environmental design as a strategy. And I'm going to give a really quick overview of SEPTED. I think SEPTED suffers a lot from a reputation born of misuse and born of using SEPTED strategies in a punitive way, but it's also something that can be used in a really positive way. And you'll see that through our examples later on. The most important thing I think to keep in mind when we're thinking about crime and victimization in place is the concentration of crime, right? This picture is an analysis of crimes from Liberty City area in Miami-Dade County. Now, Liberty City, which is outlined in the blue box, has the reputation of being one of the places in Miami-Dade County you don't want to go to. And it's thought of as high crime area. But when we actually examine crime, what you'll notice is that most of the physical space in that boundary has no shading. So even in quote unquote high crime areas, what you find is most of the spaces within that have no crime at all. And then looking further, even in the places in which crime does occur, which would be shaded in yellow, lighter shades of yellow here, most of the places in which crime occurs, it's a very small number of incidents. And what you find is that there is here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 areas, sometimes as small as an individual lot, right? But we're looking at intersections, groups of 1 or 2 lots, and 8 specific places within the entire neighborhood of Liberty City create the reputation and create the backdrop for this idea that it's a high crime area. So when we talk about addressing crime and safety in a place like Liberty City, step number 1 for us is always, what are those few physical spaces that account for that reputation or for the victimization in an area? So again, we've all heard of high impact offenders. What we find from the law of crime concentration is that, similar to a pattern in which 20% of offenders are responsible for about 80% of crimes, 20% of the places in which crime happens account for about 80% of overall crime. We also find that these places, not surprisingly, are co-located with other problems. There's about 15 years ago, very famous study that came out of Camden, New Jersey, which mapped out crime and mapped out high impact users of the healthcare system and found that those places were exactly the same. Other things that we're learning about place in crime, the benefits of green spaces. There was an accidental experiment done in Robert Taylor Homes in Chicago, where individual building managers got to control not just the buildings, but the spaces around them, and found that in buildings where green spaces were maintained and trees were maintained, crime was lower, mental health outcomes were better, health outcomes were better. We know that just greening lots in high crime areas can reduce crime. I'll show you a picture after this of some work done by the Pennsylvania Horticultural Society. We know, for example, that patterns of crime mimic the spread of infectious diseases. We're starting to learn that maybe there's a link between pollution and crime. And lots of questions being posed by the research, including how do we operationalize collective advocacy? The idea that I trust my neighbors, that if I'm in trouble, they'll be there for me. One common way of measuring collective advocacy is asking the question, if you were in trouble, would your neighbors pick up the phone and call for help? And social cohesion, utilizing the spaces around you. Do you use the local parks or the library in your neighborhood? Are you able to get groceries around where you live? Because we know that in neighborhoods where collective advocacy is higher, where social cohesion is higher, crime is lower, all other things being equal. And so the task for us then is to figure out, how do we operationalize this? How do we, and it's not surprising, is it? Healthy communities are healthy in a lot of ways. So this is an example of what I refer to the Pennsylvania Horticultural Society work, cleaning and greening. And this was studied and found that for these simple interventions, place-based interventions, not only did crime go down in these spots, including violent crime, but it went out down in the areas surrounding these lots as well. And then, some more recent focus, Center for Community Progress and the Michigan Youth Violence Prevention Center, which Tom has worked with, put out last year insights on the National Survey on Greening because of the tie between greening and violence prevention. John Jay Research and Evaluation Center last year put out a guide on reducing violence without police. First suggestion is improving the physical environment. And we'll find a way to send these links out after the meeting. But development as a crime prevention tool, old LISC publication that provides some case studies, and a growing focus on community violence interventions at the federal level, especially this year. And again, this idea that we're now in a time of experimentation around how do we create safer communities. It's a potential opportunity for a lot of folks. And again, just going back, I want to introduce the concepts of CPTED because a lot of what Tom especially is talking about is going to rely on this. And essentially looking at place, how do we modify the physical environment to make crime less likely or to make people feel safer in that environment? The first principle that you hear about is surveillance, the ability to see and be seen, right? Natural surveillance is also talked about, but it can also use technological means, though they come with kind of drawbacks. Access control are, who is allowed where and can they get access to places for public spaces. This can be difficult to prevent people from going, but then you have to rely on tools like wayfinding and signage and territoriality. Those little cues we get about who's in charge of a space. And here I'm going to go back for the, you see this fence that the Pennsylvania Horticultural Society puts up. It's not keeping out any able-bodied adult, not keeping out most able-bodied children, but it sends messages around territoriality. And then in my experience of working with CPTED, I always add image and maintenance, capable guardianship, the ability to project kind of that somebody is in charge of the space. Ideally, that is your community being in charge of the entire space. And then for organizations like housing agencies or developers, policies and practice, right? How do you codify the things you need to do to reinforce these messages? And again, referring to like the reputation that CPTED has built up, right? The ultimate in CPTED technology is good for control, but not so good for community life. So we have to learn the lessons of the past 25 years. We go to second generation and third generation approaches in CPTED. Safe Growth is an organization we work with, which is more urban planning with safety subset. But it's about fitting CPTED into the community context, not just creating sterile places as people were doing in the 90s. If you create a sterile space, crime couldn't happen, but nothing good could happen either. Having to recognize legitimate users, and again, trying to use CPTED to boost collective advocacy and social cohesion, as well as legitimacy. What we find with research around legitimacy of the law and legitimacy of government is that when people don't feel their values are taken into account in creating rules, they disregard rules. And the lessons we've learned from broken windows, which many of you are familiar with. It's a policing strategy, but didn't take into account kind of the fatal flaw in its inception. Broken windows, the idea that a police department can come in and focus on quality of life issues and small disorder issues and create a more livable community by itself was fatally flawed in its conception. And the first study that tried to test it, which happened in the New York City subway system. And of course, how is the New York City subway system different than most neighborhoods? Well, nobody lives there, right? So in the New York City subway system, people could step into that void. The police department could step into the void that is really taken up everywhere else by people who are in a neighborhood 24 hours a day, living and working and doing everything else and setting the tone. And I have this picture here. It reminds me of some work doing septet in a public housing development in Hoboken, New Jersey, before it went all bougie. But we were in a senior and disabled building, and the elder gentlemen would go out every day, take their card tables, put them out, take their chairs out, and play dominoes all the day. And security guard would say, no, they can't be there. And he'd try and run them off all the time. Because it didn't look good, right? They're probably gambling and they're boisterous. And what we tried to point out to him is, like, these are the people of the community watching everything on their street, knowing everything on their street, and showing that people live here and care about it and are watching for things that might be bad for the community. And so it's not something to be avoided. It's a huge asset, right? And so we're going to learn more now about some efforts that attempt to activate spaces and improve safety. And we'll start off with Tom White.
Thanks, Matt. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right.
Mute myself, Matt.
So Matt's going to control my slides. And I want to start with a little background on kind of how we got involved in these place-based strategies around safety. And so just a few years before this grant on this slide we call Renew the Avenue, a group of neighborhood members and some institutional members attended a septet training, and they had never really worked together before. And they were commenting during the workshop that it was really nice to get together and discuss this, and the facilitator said, well, you don't have to, this doesn't have to be the last time you get together. You should start a coalition. Fast forward a couple of years later, and that coalition received this grant in 2014 for $1 million from the Bureau of Justice Assistance, which is where I connected with Matt. So next slide, please. So we really had three simple goals. And if you're not familiar with Flint, other than some of the stuff you see in the news, just a couple of things that kind of paint a picture about why we set these goals. We have a city that's about 35 square miles. We have about 100 officers that are certified. But of those officers, we may have anywhere between 8 and 10 patrol officers after you kind of divide out the rest of the staff into other positions. And so we have a lot of kind of response issues and a lot of different types of crime that was happening, really based on the fact that there weren't enough officers to address the issues, and so we had a lot of unreported crime. So our goals were really to kind of look at assaults crime, property crime, and drug-related crime, because we have a lot of long-time drug houses. We also, as you know, are a shrinking city. We are post-industrial, and so we have a lot of what we call blight. If you're not familiar with that, essentially you have a lot of vacancy. And so we have a few of these middle neighborhoods. This is an area just off of downtown. You'll see in a map in a minute here. They'll kind of highlight that, and then really just getting people to participate at different levels. So each of these colors inside this map, and incidentally, we ended up changing this. I forgot that we had changed this map because there is a stigma around putting a red border around a map. And we did not think about that. We were just trying to highlight the area when we initially did this. And so I accidentally grabbed this old map. But each of these areas is a neighborhood where there was some crime hotspots. And then the areas that are white are hospitals or universities. And so we're an area that's about 2 square miles, 6,000 residents, with a number of parks, trails, open spaces, 2 hospitals, 2 universities, 2 K-8 schools, and then a high school just in the outskirts of this. So next slide, please. So when we looked at our crime data, we found that each of these neighborhoods, again, they are two of them are I would say middle neighborhoods, and then we have a historic district, and then we had a neighborhood that was largely gutted due to abandonment and blight and demolition. And we found that we had hotspots in these neighborhoods, and you had a lot of people who love these neighborhoods. They lived there generationally, and they really wanted to stay in these neighborhoods. But similar to, if you're sitting outside and the bugs start coming out or the bees start coming out, eventually it gets to be enough to where you just kind of leave. And that's what kind of is a metaphor for what we were seeing in these neighborhoods. Was the crime wasn't super high, but it was enough to really kind of push people out of these neighborhoods. And we wanted to slow that because these were great neighborhoods, and they were some of the last neighborhoods that really had that neighborhood character and good density and good social connectivity. So we looked at it from a number of different ways in these crime maps. Next slide, please. So this really kind of outlines our, it got a little jumbled here, but this outlines kind of our philosophy of work in terms of place-based work, whether it's placemaking or crime prevention. And so in places like Flint and other places across the country, you may encounter you have an issue that requires some type of stabilization with the goal of being with the revitalization. And each of these, you need a place that's designated, you need resources, you need people, and you need programming. We liken this to farming. If you wanted to farm, you don't just pick a plot of land and put seeds in, and in my understanding, expect it to grow. You've got to cultivate that before you have that yield. And similarly, in these neighborhoods that we're working with, we had to do quite a bit of stabilization efforts, whether it was SEPTED or other efforts, before we really saw some of the revitalization stuff happening. Next slide, please. So the other thing that we really think about is what's our return on investment. So, like others, we were losing population, and what kind of advertisement would be if it said, "Come to Flint, we have less crime than we did last year." Is that really a win? We're engaged in all these activities on one side to get to at least a stable point. But we really wanted to look at it from a really well-rounded perspective. So next slide, please. So we added in all these other things, and they're happening at varying levels, but it's not just about lower crime, but our tax revenue had suffered. So our city services, we weren't able to fund the police force at the same level. Our parks department was gutted, and so the parks planner liked to joke that his leg is the parks planner, because 25% of his time was spent in parks. But we also wanted people to have opportunity for economic opportunity and feel like they're in a place of less disorder and see investment. So next slide, please. So we had a number of strategies that we deployed that are actually still happening to this day. Actually, just found out about an update on one before I joined this meeting here. So we had 5 different SEPTED strategies. We had placemaking strategies, we had resident organizing, and so on. We even had a school safety project. We looked at technology, because I was working for Kettering University, which used to be called General Motors Institute. So it's a feeder school for engineers into the auto industry and other high-tech fields. And so we had a lot of technologists that were looking at, well, what could we deploy technologically? How can we use data better? And public safety partnerships. I mentioned the really severe constraints of the law enforcement. And so we looked at how do we strengthen those relationships between the county sheriffs and the state police and some of the certified officers that are at some of the campuses and the hospitals. Next slide, please. So we were looking really primarily at placemaking as a public safety strategy. And one of the reasons why we're looking at this, and you may or may not encounter this, was when you have a place that has some safety challenges, where there's some crime happening, sometimes the amount of crime that's happening is large, and sometimes it's just the capacity is an issue. And so what we were thinking about was, how do we as a coalition come together to try to improve the space in the neighborhoods, but also reduce the likelihood of crime, so that law enforcement, who are the experts in these, in responding to crime, can really focus in on some of the more severe and larger issues of crime that we as regular citizens really shouldn't have a heavy role in. And so we looked at, things like the blight again, and how to engage with people, and vandalism, and drug markets and other things. So next slide, please. So I like this quote. It's from Jane Jacobs. She was in New York, and was a fierce advocate for cities and community engagement. But she said cities have the capability of providing something for everybody only because and only when they're created by everybody. And so that was another part of our kind of mandate, was not a top-down, eds and meds institutions dictating what we're going to do, but really wanted this to be born from the ground up. Next slide, please. So if you're not super familiar with placemaking, I've just got a couple, 2 or 3 slides that just kind of give you a sense of what we're talking about here. So this can be an idea, something you want to do to a place, or it can be a hands-on approach where you're actually doing something. There's an activity or a program happening. And it really is about inspiring people to reimagine spaces. So if you see this space here, obviously at some point the seating was not painted. They may not have had bean bags and other colorful stuff. It may have been very basic and lacking any type of programming. And so it's really about how do we maximize the share value of the spaces that we occupy and use. And that could be spaces like this, or it could be our actual neighborhoods or businesses and so on. Next slide, please. So again, we mentioned the Project for Public Spaces. This is one of my favorite diagrams that they've ever created. And it's just kind of outlines, and you can Google what makes a great place, and this will come up in Google image search. But essentially there's 4 components that we really look at, like what level of sociability is a space, how many activities and uses does it have, is it comfortable, does it have attractive image? One thing that stuck out to me was, do you see people bringing, what are the places that you come to or that you use that if someone was visiting your community, you would take them to? Or do you see people taking pictures, whether it's graduation pictures or wedding pictures? Those are the types of things we think about. And then how connected is it? For instance, we have a man-made lake in our city that's in the far northeast, and it's about 1.5 miles off any sidewalks or transit. And a lot of the youth that I used to work with had never been there, and it was only about 6 miles away from them, depending on where in the neighborhood they were. So we think about how connected it is in terms of transit, or just being able to see it and be aware of it. Next slide, please. So when we get into some of the strategies that we're looking at, we looked at tactical placemaking, and there's really 2 types. If you're familiar with it, you'll be aware of this, but there's tactical urbanism and there's lighter, quicker, cheaper. Next slide, please. So tactical urbanism, this is really when you're dealing with problems in the environment. So maybe there's a problem with a roadway or something, and it's the built environment, and you want to test out different things before you invest, or the community invests money in permanent changes, which may or may not work. So a good example of this could be in Atlanta. When I was there a couple of years ago, they were testing out protected bike lanes. Instead of investing in the infrastructure, they take the curb blocks and they put them end to end in the street to kind of create a protected area to see how people were using that street. And depending on how it worked, they would put in the permanent, infrastructure. Guerrilla and urbanism, on the other hand, would be kind of raising awareness of an issue. So, it could be people planting or spray painting weeds to highlight the fact that people aren't maintaining properties, or just anything to kind of raise awareness. And then we get to the one that we really focused on, which is lighter, quicker, cheaper. And it's pretty self-explanatory. We're looking at what's the project we can do with the fewest resources, as fast as we can, and as cheaply as we can, to test out ideas. But they may not be problems. It might just be, maybe this space could have this. Well, let's check it out and do a pop-up, coffee shop, or we'll do a pop-up this. Next slide, please. So when you're planning your activity, these are just a few things that you want to think about. Where are you going to have it? Why do you want to have it there? When? So is it weekends? Is it summer? How long is it going to last? What kind of materials or elements are you going to use? Also, you don't want to just build something and assume that people are going to come there. You want to have some type of programming or way to activate it to draw people in. and you want to think about, a number up to maybe 10 things that you could have there, so that if you plan 2 programs, maybe a few people in the community are interested in that. But if you have 10, then people have, they self-select out of those 10 which ones they're interested in, and then they'll come to the space and utilize it. And then contingencies, if you can't get the materials, if you require permits or something, all these things, weather, and then how are you going to evaluate it? Because the idea is to make the case for it and advocate, whether it's to your government, your community, or whomever. And then depending on how long it lasts, how are you going to steward it? Next slide, please. So again, you're thinking about a problem. You're developing a strategy, and then you're looking at the results. So this image, it's just an example. I think this was in the Northeast, and there was a lot of cut through traffic. I believe there's like a public space. So there was a safety issue with like children. And so they decided to close that through traffic temporarily by putting some paint that would wash off over time and some sod, and then keeping it open for bicyclists and pedestrians, and seeing how that changed the throughway for the neighborhoods. Next slide, please. So again, we talked about how this is a community-led process. And so this is a really iterative process where, you're defining the issue, you're evaluating, you're coming up with the idea, and then you're doing a series of short-term experiments and doing the ongoing evaluation. You're continually modifying this. Next slide. So, when we think about this, we want to think about, again, access and linkages. Like, is this accessible? Is it space? Is it surrounded by blank walls? Like, what do we do with those walls? And how does that make people feel? And so here's a space, I think, in Louisville that, if you walked by when it wasn't activated, it would probably feel a little bit strange. But now it's a public space where there's live performances and street art and other things going on. Next slide. Well, I think about comfort and image. So this is an alley. I can't remember where this is exactly at, but all they did was hang these umbrellas up. And if you think of alleys historically, we think about them as dangerous spaces. We think of, if it was an alley in England, that's where Jack the Ripper operated and stuff. But this is exactly the opposite. And it allows businesses to activate that space, and it creates additional spaces. I was in Providence last week with Matt, and we were talking about the issues with like using streets, and how can we use other spaces to reduce the congestion in streets when they want to have large events. Next slide, please. Sometimes you can think of just really easy ways to activate a space. So this is just on a main street, and you've got a knitting group that chose to meet on a bench. And so now you've got programming on a public space, and you've got story hour happening on another bench. And so sometimes it's just that easy. And we've had instances where we've done that. And when there was a criminal element or problematic stuff, that stuff goes away real fast. So back to Renew the Avenue, our grant, just wanted to give a couple local examples of how we've deployed this lighter, quicker, cheaper with some crime prevention. Next slide, please. So one way that we did it was we had a block party, which I'll talk about here in a minute. The slide on the picture on the upper right-hand corner is not ours, but it's just a good example of if you wanted to do some experimentation with adding, bike lanes, that, it's as simple as cardboard templates and some spray paint. The one on the bottom right is actually lighter, quicker, cheaper, where there was a crime hotspot. And what we found was that we needed to engage with the moms and the youth. That it was oftentimes the boyfriends or partners that were engaged in drug trafficking and other issues of crime. So the community officer and some AmeriCorps started a reading program. They create a little free library, and they meet every summer, and we're able to make inroads to get information on what was going on in that neighborhood and how to address it, and they gain the support of the actual tenants there. Next slide, please. So this is a little bit larger placemaking, but we did do some lighter, quicker, cheaper here. This is a crime hotspot that we had in one of our middle neighborhoods, and it's a World War II era housing, I think about 180 units. And so you can see kind of the overlit, the top of it on the right side. And what we found was that there was just a lot of criminal activity happening here. People were coming here to commit crimes. There was a lot of drug markets. It became one of those places where it was a really nice community. And then over time, it became no background check, no income check, no deposit, anything goes. And it was really impacting this neighborhood where we had a lot of people that had lived in the neighborhood 50, 60 years, and a lot of young families that were looking at these neighborhoods. And this was a really big detractor for them. So we decided to do a couple things, and you can see kind of where it falls in here. So it's near the bottom here, near the river. Next slide. So we decided to do a block party, and we got permission from the owner of the property. And what they did was we did this place assessment, and we did a crime assessment. And when the place assessment, the owner offered, if you participate as a tenant, you'll be in a drawing for half off one of the next month's rent. So we had a lot of participation, and the community worked with even the residents that lived in the neighborhood adjacent to this to participate. Next slide, please. And it looked really simple. It looked like this, you got your number scale of 1 to 4, how attractive do you feel like this place is? How safe do you feel? And so on. Are you seeing a sense of pride? And we heard things like, the landlord said, well, I have a really big problem because people are bringing lazy boys and couches out, and they're sitting out all day and they're just drinking, and it has a bad image. And when we talked to the residents, they said, hey, there used to be benches, but someone took them all away, and we really want to be outside, so we just brought our own furniture outside. So sometimes it's as simple as just telling the landlord, hey, put benches up and the lazy boys will go back inside. Next slide, please. So this is kind of what it looks like when you're engaged in this. You've identified priorities, and then you get an aerial map and you start sketching out, well, where would we like these things to happen? Where do we need the seating? Where do we need the trash cans, and so on? Next slide, please. And this is a couple images. So we've got the community police officers, the police chief playing Frisbee. We brought a food truck in. We had free food from the food truck for people. And so it was a good time. Next slide, please. So here's a couple things that we found. People felt this feeling of safety was fair. They felt that there was, again, poor places to sit, and the visibility was kind of split between poor and fair, and so on. Next slide. And this is just another one. There was no events. There was no mix of services nearby. It didn't feel busy, and there were some kids, but not many. Next slide, please. So the residents identified these priorities. They said there's a lot of litter, and it's because we don't have enough trash cans. There's nothing to do, so we would like a basketball court. Additional seating. The bus stop areas need improvement. There's some issues with the laundry rooms and stuff. So you can see there's a mix of place-based stuff and quality of life things. Next slide, please. So, and then we did a site plan, and we kind of developed where a garden could go, and a picnic area, and so on. Next slide, please.
4 minutes, Tom.
All right, thank you. Next slide, please.
Yep.
All right. So a couple other strategies that we deployed real quick, and then I'll just talk real quickly about the results. So we did some pop-up restaurants. So we had areas where there had been business and they were gone or they were closed. So we used vacant lots, and we used a coffee shop that had a food license to allow restaurants to pop up to see kind of what reaction and interest there was in that type of business in these neighborhoods. Same thing with art and markets, food trucks. We even, again, I mentioned the lake that was about 8 miles away. So we did a pop-up water park to see if there was a need for water-based recreation in some of these areas. When I was a kid, we used to slow roll through we called it the Miller Road Mansions. It was where all the GM execs and everybody lived, and you'd see all these lights, and that doesn't happen anymore. So we started a holiday lighting contest. And then there were some pocket parks that were created as well. Next slide. So a couple images to show you here. When it comes up. Okay, so yeah, from a crime perspective, we also had a few other lighter, quicker, cheaper strategies. So we got these solar lights. So we had people that maybe didn't have the means to hire an electrician to have lights wired in. So we went on Amazon and we bought a bunch of these solar LED lights, and a group called the Light Squad started. And they were also part of this Blight Squad, and they would do cleanups or they would hang lights. Next slide. We had a bike patrol pop up. So we had residents riding along with community police officers and AmeriCorps. Similar, we had a trail group with, you can see them on this golf cart. And then we had the reading program. Next slide. We also did a number of meetings. And so we have monthly meetings where we identified priorities. And then basically it was my job and a few others to help implement the projects that were devised by the neighborhood groups. Next slide. Here's a couple flyers of the pop-up events. And actually one of the things that happened, we did that same thing that we did at the apartment complex for a school. And one of the local foundations found out about it and ended up building a $15 million early childhood education center behind it, and then implemented all of the kids' ideas into the place enhancements as well. Next slide. So we also believed in training. So I'm trained in CEPTED and a few other people are. And so we started conducting trainings, and then we started doing these pop-up labs so that we made it as flexible and as accessible for people to show up for maybe an hour, hour and a half and learn how to do these assessments and not have to take a day off or travel to gain this information. Same thing with the placemaking. We did the placemaking training, and I see I have about a minute left. We also did real estate training. Next slide. And we did some real estate scenario planning. You can, yeah, you can go that one. So where are we at? This is just my last 3 slides here. So if you go to the next slide with the crime hotspot map, this was where we started. And so you can see we had a couple hotspots and we had a few areas that were problematic. A couple months or about 15 months in, if you go to the next slide, you can see the crime dissipated, went away, and the hotspots almost entirely went away, with the exception of the apartment complex, which we were still working with. Incidentally, I just got word today that the crime hotspot that's on the very border, it's the lone red, has been shut down. They were selling alcohol to minors, and so their liquor license was revoked yesterday. And so that one, we started working on that in 2014, and it took 8 years, but it's being addressed as well. So the last slide just shows some of our results here. So where did we end up? This was back in, I think, 2018. We saw a 78% decrease in blight properties. Participation went up by 250%. This number of 50 million has actually grown to 250 million in the recent years. We saw a 49% decrease in assaults, 53% decrease in robberies, 78% decrease in burglary, and vandalism went down 55%. And we really felt that it was due in large part to what Matt had talked about, this kind of marrying of traditional law enforcement with place-based strategies that are around enhancement, but also trying to address issues of crime and social cohesion. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Tom. Great. And apologize for rushing Tom. I mean, we're all very passionate about this work we do, and editing ourselves is probably the biggest challenge for these presentations. I'm gonna turn things over now to let Hillary talk about community capitals policing in Alameda County and some examples from there.
Thanks. And Matt, I am going to give you a public hard time because you told me to limit our slides to 6 or 8, and Tom just blew it out of the park. So I'm going to apologize in advance that our slides are condensed, but we'll be talking more than we have slides. Thanks for having us. I'm Hillary Bass. I work for Captain Marty Nidifer here in the Alameda County Sheriff's Office. I'm a civilian employee, and he and I met in 2005 and began this effort together to invest in our unincorporated areas of Alameda County, which we'll hear more about specifically from Marty. But the unincorporated communities are the patrol jurisdiction of the Alameda County Sheriff's Office because there's no city services or city municipal services, including mayors and city council and all of the above. So the county has to step in to handle the investments. And as a result, and once again, you'll hear more detail about this from Marty about the history of the place. But when I showed up as a native San Franciscan, I knew nothing about this community and got to know it through the eyes of the young people at a low-income housing complex who told me all about the issues that they were experiencing, which really, what I found out later, were the symptoms of decades of disinvestment in that place. So Marty and I started out and Marty started the nonprofit Deputy Sheriff's Activities League, or DSAL, that you'll hear us reference, as a way to innovate within the Sheriff's Office and create strategies for bringing in new dollars to take risks and try new new approaches to addressing these root issues of crime that perhaps the agency itself wasn't able to do as a result of its own constraints. Like most government has these types of bureaucratic constraints. And through that nonprofit, I need to close my window. Through that nonprofit, DSAL, we were able to do a bunch of different investments, and only one of which we'll talk really specifically about. But we started a youth soccer league, which ended up having multiple thousands of young people and their parents involved. We ended up building a boxing gym and fitness arena at a underutilized adult school campus, and now coming soon at Footsalt Park. And we did a range of murals along the corridor, which was a blighted, kind of dilapidated, high crime area. And we ended up finding ourselves involved in starting a local food system, which we don't think we anticipated that would happen, but that is happening. So when we were evaluated at one point by a professor at Cornell University, you can go to the next slide, and she was evaluating some of the work we were doing through a grant, and we were telling her about all of these different types of investments that we had been putting in over the years. And at the time, Marty was trying to identify, like, what is the sort of handle, what is the name of this work that we're doing? Is it community-oriented policing? Is that it? Is it collective efficacy? Is it, it's combining these things that you heard Tom and Matt talk about with CEPTAD types of strategy and creative placemaking strategies, but what is the name of this, the whole model? And this very smart economics professor said, I know what it is. It's an economics model. It's called community capitals. So we took that and ran with it, and we're calling everything we do at this point community capitals policing. The economics framework is that if you invest in these 7 capitals, built, natural, political, social, human, cultural, and financial, you will have a more thriving economy in that neighborhood or in that particular jurisdiction. And what we were finding very authentically is that the same thing applies to public safety outcomes. When you invest in turning a blighted area into a beautiful regenerative farm, it changes the way people experience that place when they walk by and they take a deep breath or they stop and they sit down. That's natural capital. And as Matt mentioned, that does impact public safety outcomes and mental health, or the built environment in general. The earlier example that Matt gave around the youth center, when the young people were talking early on about their experience of crime and issues in the community, their simplistic reflection of the problem was that they were bored. There's nothing to do. And by building and investing in a $23 million youth center in the heart of the community, that was like a first step at getting a piece of built and changing the built environment in a way that's going to change some of those outcomes. And that was just step one. But the built environment obviously impacts behavior, as you heard from Tom as well. Financial capital, our community has some of the lowest income people and the highest unemployment rate. But if there's no changing in the opportunities for jobs, how do you change those outcomes? So building a local food system was one of our approaches. Cultural capital, seeing a reflection of yourself and experiencing culture in your own community, whether that's through art, music, or food. These are important ways to feel connected and engaged, and that impacts people's sense of identity and pride in place. Investing in human capital, starting a soccer league is nice, but teaching a young person to play a sport that has a chance at getting them a scholarship to college one day is a whole different way to look at that lens of investing in human capital. Or having a behavioral health unit under Captain Nidifer, where therapists teach people how to retrain their brains and their cognition as to how they make decisions. That's investing in human capital and decision-making processes. Social capital is who you know, and as also was brought up earlier, if you know your neighbors and your neighbors know you and they know your children, There's a whole range of positive things that can take place as a result of just that social connection. Maybe you get connected to a job opening, or your kid gets told by another adult to not do the bad thing on the street that probably the parent wasn't actually watching. It's known in the law enforcement nomenclature that antisocial networks are one of the greatest reasons that people end up committing crimes. So having a pro-social network is the antidote to that. But you have to build places where those positive social interactions can actually get accomplished. And political capital, which you'll hear from Lieutenant Joe a little bit about, as well as investing in people's ability to be their own active agents of change and be engaged civically. And in areas that have been disinvested in, like our unincorporated Ashland community, there's no organizing element. There's no people don't even know how to engage and have a voice, because it's just that disconnected, and they've been that disenfranchised over the years. And Marty, I'll take your probably something you would have already said, but there was at one point there was an election where out of the 30,000 people that live in this community, only 410 voted. So that's the sort of degree of disengagement and disenfranchisement that people have been experiencing there. So to create a new political apparatus is an important part of people feeling like they have voice and that their place matters and that they have agency to make something different in the world. So those are the capitals. We continue to invest in all of these ways, and this is a scalable model for any jurisdiction in any community. And getting your police agency or in your jurisdiction involved in leading in these investments is a particularly important strategy to also creating what is referred to as procedural justice, where people in the community see the police as being on your side, as being part of what the investment needed to make the place better and make their lives better for long-term public safety, rather than the sort of traditional Band-Aid approach to addressing immediate issues. So I'm going to pause there and pass it to my boss, Captain Nidifer, to talk a little bit more about the history of the area and why we did this work.
Thanks, Hillary, and thanks to the Middle Neighborhoods Initiative and LISC for having us. It's a great conversation. So I guess, how did we get to this idea of community capital policing? I oversee, as Hillary mentioned, Alameda County Sheriff's Office. We oversee our jail systems, and we oversee patrol operations in the unincorporated communities in Alameda County. I work out of our patrol division under a commander. There's two captains here, myself and my partner, who oversees sort of traditional patrol and investigative operations. I oversee what we call our Youth and Family Service Bureau, which includes about 24 sworn deputy sheriffs, includes about 18 now mental health workers, licensed clinical social workers, and marriage and family therapists who oversee, who run a clinic, mental health clinic in the Ashland community. They provide mental health services out of that youth center that Matt had talked about, that I call the house that Hillary built. One of the projects that had gotten done in our community over the past 10 years. And they also provide what I would tell you is the only evidence-based clinical case managed reentry model out of our jail system. All of which I feel like all of those elements, those behavioral health elements, interconnect with our community capitals policing model and our ability to address the needs of our neighborhoods. The third element that I oversee, or that's part of my bailiwick, is the oversight of what Hillary just mentioned, was the nonprofit that we created called the Deputy Sheriff's Activities League, which is our version of a PAL program, but one that under Hillary's direction and guidance has grown into into sort of a multifaceted workforce development, economic development, community development, force multiplying entity to perpetuate the work that we're doing through this community capitals policing model. As Matt also mentioned, I grew up in the Ashland area.
Next
So-
slide. Matt, too.
Yeah, next slide. So in our unincorporated area, there's a number of different communities, including two, Ashland and Cherryland, which are our higher crime areas. I grew up in Ashland, and it is totally one of these middle neighborhoods. At the time I was growing up, it was very much a blue collar, working class neighborhood. The people in my neighborhood, my father was a commercial printer. The guy next door to us was a railroad engineer. We had an auto mechanic, a butcher. It was essentially blue collar folks raising families in these neighborhoods. And there were businesses, restaurants that catered to family restaurants that catered to that population. There was a roll arena. There was drive-in movie theaters. There were tennis courts in the neighborhood that people provided tennis lessons. There was a swimming pool complex at the local high school that we used to go to pretty much every day during the summer. Beautiful swimming pool complex. Over the years, the demographics of the neighborhood shifted, and many of those businesses and enterprises that and recreational spaces that used to provide opportunities for kids to go and families to go enjoy themselves and play and connect and create that collective efficacy pretty much disappeared. So I came back as a deputy sheriff to the area in 2000, in the early 2000s, and I worked out of our jail, and I worked as a patrolman and then as a school resource officer, which is where I started our Deputy Sheriff's Activities League, the PAL program. I would be in conversations with kids. I worked out of our continuation school, and the staff there would bring kids into the deputies' offices so that we could have talks with them to kind of put them on the straight and narrow, as it were. And we'd have these conversations with them, and I would be telling them, do the right thing, don't do the wrong thing, engage in positive activities, sports, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they would tell me, I'm paraphrasing here, but deputy, what the hell are you talking about? All of those things that you're talking about cost money. I'm paraphrasing, and we don't have a lot of money to go do those things. And as I began to kind of take a look around in the neighborhoods that I grew up in, that I, had left and gone to school and come back, I began to recognize the way they've changed. And that was the impetus to start the nonprofit Deputy Sheriff's Activities League. And we started it with a few recreational programs. And as we moved forward, and as I connected with Hillary, who was working somewhere else, but in the same area, in the same realm, we eventually hired Hillary, and we began talking about different ways that the sheriff's office and the nonprofit could make an impact, a positive impact on the neighborhoods. And in the whole process, we started to dig deeper into the issues affecting the neighborhood. And as we did so, it became clear to us that the Ashland Cherryland community actually is probably, I think, the poorest neighborhood in all of Alameda County. The health disparities in Alameda in those neighborhoods are horrible. The rates of diabetes, all-cause mortality, heart disease are way above county averages. There are no parks in the area. There's 0.25 acres of park, Hillary, per 100,000 people, and it should be 3 acres per 100,000 people. So vastly underparked. We did, further digging, and recognize that there weren't a lot of activities going on for kids. There wasn't spaces for them to for families to go recreate, to connect to. And that if we were gonna, and that all those intertwined, interconnected social issues were part and parcel of what were driving the crime issues and the recidivism issues that we were facing in those neighborhoods. And it occurred to us that to begin to impact at the root level what those issues were, we need to begin to create interventions around those neighborhoods. As I mentioned, I have probably now under my unit, including the nonprofit, there's nearly 100 people working out of our sheriff's office / DSAL, engaged in this work that we're outlining. But I would tell you that I actually, in my delusions of grandeur, I run a virtual division that includes folks from our social services agency, our healthcare services agency, the board of supervisors, and every other county agency and nonprofit in the area, because we've leveraged all of those entities and all of those groups to create the programming and the placemaking and economic and workforce activities that we have driven forward. So Hillary sort of outlined many of those, but one in particular, as we're developing our concepts for community capitalist policing and engagement in the community, and how the sheriff's office can use its bully pulpit and its cachet as the public safety entity to begin to focus resources back into the neighborhood that had been utterly disinvested in. We were able to win a Byrne Criminal Justice Innovation Grant back in 2014. It's where we made contact with Matt. And it allowed us to specifically identify two blighted vacant lots, two pretty large blighted vacant lots in both the Ashland Cherryland area, and work to activate those spaces. And again, in order to do so, we brought together a coalition that included our local board of supervisor, whose jurisdiction that was, and his staff, the local chamber of commerce, which covers this area, but had really sort of not been engaged and involved in the area very much, and other CBOs active and working in the area. We brought them all together under steering committee. We reviewed these issues and these problems and these stats that we're facing, and kind of through this public safety lens, we launched what we call Eden Night Live, which was a night market, a community event, park space that we created out of these vacant lots that ended up to be a pretty amazing gathering space for families in the neighborhoods. And I'm gonna let Charles go into that further, but I want to also add that in doing this and out of that, the places that we activated 5-6 years ago, as a consequence of activating them, and the work leveraging other institutions and other agencies in the area, the one space is in the process of being developed into a local park plaza, which will beautify the business corridor, and the other space is likely to end up as some version of park space as well. So these are sometimes, it's a long game sometimes, but what we found is, I think that what we found is by sort of casting public safety in this broader lens, we're able to divert long-term resources into solutions to the problems. And as Hillary mentioned, among the benefits of that is over time, as we do so, and all of this happens in concert with the neighborhoods and the folks who live in the neighborhoods. Over time, those folks become partners with the sheriff's office, with DSAL, in creating and building solutions to the problems that everyone knows afflicts the neighborhoods. And that we firmly believe leads to a level of trust in the agency that folks now believe is sort of working on their behalf, as opposed to in a way that that only is punitive. It changes the relationship, changes the nature, changes the whole question around police legitimacy and trust. So, so it turns out that by working in concert and on behalf of the neighborhood to help improve conditions, people will like you and people will trust you, and people will view you as partners. So, and we literally, our deputies literally were working hand in hand with these folks and built these facilities. So I'll turn it over to Charles, who will tell you how that got done.
And Charles, you have about 5 or 6 minutes.
All right, thank you. So I just want to start by saying that Hillary and Marty are electric. And the reason that I wanted to come work for their unit was just because I knew that they were passionate about the work. And I was definitely surprised at how much they had been able to accomplish in an area which I hadn't had any real success that I could speak about. I just was treading water and you know, trying to hold badness at bay. When I came in, Marty tasked me with just getting to know people. And one of the initiatives that we started was facilitating community meetings where we were encouraging the local community to take political action, to start building relationships with each other, and to look at their neighborhood as their home and not just a place that they lived and used as a base to get to work. And as we began to have these conversations and people saw that we were invested, they started telling us what they believed was missing. And that's one of the things that really got us looking at what could we do to help activate the spaces that were not just vacant, but that were blighted and beacons for crime, huge hotspots on maps. They just were basically, like Marty's saying, there was nothing for families to do. There was no entertainment in the area where a large family could go on a meager salary and be able to have a great time in a safe place. So we opened up our vision and started looking around and seeing what other models were out there that we could try to replicate and maybe even improve on. And we found this program that was going on at a church in Sacramento that I believe they were calling Sacramento Night Lights. And it was basically just a lot that was connected to a church. And on any given night in the summertime when they were running it, they would have around 900 people show up. There was music, games, food, all kinds of great activities for family, and it was really building community. So we went and visited it. It was absolutely amazing. We had a great time. You know, it was a great way to get paid and have some fun. And we brought that concept back to Ashland. So we sat down with that engine team that Marty was talking about, and we came up with the concept of Eden Night Live. It wasn't just activating the space. We actually began to make some capital improvements to the site. We put up lighting, you know, we flattened out the area. We made it where it was a more inviting space. And very quickly, as we were building the space, people that we knew from our community meetings began to stop by and help out. But it was just a really interesting thing to see so many people from the community stop and wonder why this space that had never been activated and never had any positive improvements to it, why the cops were out there, sometimes even in uniform, working on the space with people in the community. And people just began to invite themselves in and actually helped build the space. We actually were even able to improve our timeline of taking that from the blighted space that it was to making it something that was open and inviting to the community. And just the things that happened there were beautiful. Right here, you're looking at a portion that we converted into a soccer arena after we were forced to move from one site to another. And people really loved this event. It brought people out, and we had such a great time. It really enforced my love for the community, and it reinvigorated my love for this job. As much as the people in the community were able to see that their community was turning into something that they could be proud of, a place that they could call home, they were transforming us just as much. We were able to build relationships that made us feel good about going to work, but it also made us much better at our jobs. Where we would go to a crime, violent crime, property crime, and previously we were never able to find people who would speak up for their community. All of a sudden we had people calling us, inviting us over to have a snack and talking about the problems in their community. And that makes you start to feel like a super cop. It makes you start feeling like what we got into this career for can actually happen. And the only reason it's actually possible is because the community has bought in with us, because they see us buying in with them. Just to physically build something with the community, it builds a level of cooperation and a level of relationship that every single law enforcement agency in the land needs to learn something about. Like I said, the passion that Marty and Hillary had for this area and this work, it was so evident and so quick to see how fast we could operationalize it, how much the community wanted to be involved with it, and how effective that it truly was to make this community get back to its middle neighborhood roots and start seeing people build relationships and move forward as a community.
I would just add one thing that, to the point of sort of long-term system change and using tactical urbanism as a strategy. This particular example and several others that we have invested in have led to permanent shifts. Because of this effort, and Joe, at the time, Deputy Joe and his colleagues building out these spaces that you've seen in the pictures here, and having this proof of concept and using the funding through Department of Justice grant to do this particular work. There's now permanent park plazas going in on these sites. So it worked. And there were 18,000 people that came through. There were 27 businesses that got launched and kicked off. And there are official community groups that are engaged in our civic environment. And there are thousands of people who know that the sheriff's office actually is who we've said that it can be because of all of this work. So it is possible to use these types of strategies to make real change.
Yeah, and as a closing note, I'd just like to say that what you've seen from Alameda County is just the smallest fraction of the work that DSAL has been able to do, and changes and reforms that Marty has been able to effect. He talked about the licensed clinical social workers, 18, I think it was, working for the department. That came when they figured out that if they could bill direct to Medi-Cal for mental health services provided to people using Medicaid in the state of California, they could afford to hire all these people. And so then that was a reform that was done. The gardening program that was mentioned started as a way to get some outdoor time for juveniles in lockup, and has turned into multi-site urban gardening program that provides reentry work and is a commercial food production enterprise. And now there's a food truck prep station that's been added to that. And these are just, a couple of the things that when Alameda County Sheriff's Office decided to go in for community capitals policing and follow each trail where it led, started to do some just incredible things that don't look like law enforcement in most places, and aren't meant to be enforcement, but are meant to be prevention. And
Thanks for that, Matt. Can I just add one quick thing to that?
if you can do it quickly, Marty.
Quickly, one sentence or two sentences. So all of that, all of those things have led to a change within the sheriff's office, and it happens gradually. And it really, in my mind, is what reimagining policing looks like, in a way that's in concert with community and community institutions. Thanks.
That's great. Wow. Thank you guys so much, all of you. What I asked Matt for was I gave him a tall order. I wanted to hear about both strategies that anybody attending this webinar could start working on tomorrow. And I think Tom gave us a lot of those. And I also wanted to see what it was like for an organization that had worked over the long term to develop long-term strategies and an institutional system that could always be there and prevent crime spikes from happening. And I think we got that from the team in Alameda. And let's not forget that their first step is, in fact, something everybody can do, is go start talking to people in the community. We we so often say this, but it's like head slapping that the most obvious thing to do is to understand what people in our communities want and need, and then actually organize to deliver that, right? So every one of you is really inspirational. I hope all of the attendees are fired up to start to implement some of these strategies in your own communities. Just a couple of slides to close this out. Again, please join the Middle Neighborhoods Community of Practice. We'd love to have you. We have about actually 400 people now, so it's easy to join. Go to middleneighborhoods.org and sign up at the bottom of any of our web pages. A couple of things we have coming up, one directly related to this. We do a monthly community engagement chat where people just come if they want to. Usually there is no topic. People suggest a topic they want to talk about, and that's what happens. But this time we're going to link the topic to this webinar and actually talk about community engagement strategies for safety. So if you'd like to talk more about what you heard today, we're going to be doing that on August 24th, and we will send out the login information for that in the follow-up email to this webinar. We'll also send out a link to the recording. We'll send out a list of the resources that were referred to in this webinar, so it should give you a lot to work with. On September 13th, we have a webinar that is about strategies to address institutional investors in middle neighborhoods. We're all seeing a huge number of new institutional investors, and we have a BayPAC group from the city of Cleveland has just published a report with their recommendations after having studied these institutional investors for 2 years. So you can really take some of their recommendations and start working on that. We always like to call out our partner Center for Community Progress, and they have their own great webinar series, the Cornerstone webinar series. So check them out. Please email us for any ideas that you have for webinars you'd like to see, all of that stuff. Matt, Tom, Hillary, Charles, and Marty, you guys were amazing, and I really, really appreciate it. I really wish you the absolute best on continued results from your strategies and your activities. It's nice to have some inspirational good news on the issue of safety, and you all gave it to us today. So I think our time is up. So I'm going to close this out, and I know Matt needs to get to the airport. So we'll let you go, Matt. Thanks again, everybody. Have a great rest of the week.